Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for your interest in attending our Pathways of Progress webinar today. We held one of these in the fall talking about Pathways of Progress at the beginning of year and setting goals for students. This middle of year session will be kind of, you've set those pathways, how do you look at that data and some thinking around those pieces. Just a couple logistics before we get going. When we use Zoom, your lines are automatically muted due to the size of the group. We had a good response to this, so there's lots of folks in the webinar today. Please type questions that you have into the chat box for the group to see, and those questions will pause as appropriate to answer those, and we'll definitely take time for questions at the end of the session. We're planning probably no more than 40 minutes this afternoon of your time, so we just appreciate you being here. I did record this session and it will be posted on our website, as well as I will send a copy of the recording to you as soon as it's processed and the webinar is completed. There will be a handout as well that we'll go through during the session, and that will be in an email to you too. So I'm Tammy Yetter. I serve the Northeast and North Central parts of the state of Colorado through the Literacy Office, and I'm also managing the ELAT project this year. And I have with me today Andrew Benish from Amplify. He's one of our fantastic supports in the project, and you're going to learn a lot from him today. I'll be managing the chat, and Andrew will be providing content, so we'll go ahead and hop in and get started.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. As Tammy mentioned, we're going to cover a few things today. We're going to really make sure we all understand how to look at our Pathways of Progress data at the middle of year, at a classroom level and at a student level. We're going to talk about planning and leading data conversations around the Pathways of Progress data, and then also consider instructional next steps based on that MOY Pathways of Progress data. So let's go ahead and jump on in. Okay, so we touched on this at during the beginning of the year session, but really when we're looking at how our readers, how our students are doing, we want to consider two things. We want to look at proficiency, and proficiency on key skills. So that's our benchmark status. Are our students at benchmark, above benchmark, below benchmark? Where are they on that status? We also want to look at growth. And so Pathways of Progress gives us a way to look at growth. It measures growth for students at all levels. Also provides a planning tool that supports setting goals. So just as we go through this, we'll be mentioning different things about proficiency and growth, and really to get a more complete view of how a student is doing, we want to look at both proficiency and growth. Okay, so understanding Pathways of Progress really quickly. Basically, Pathways of Progress are growth comparisons with students that begin at the same place. So on the slide, you can see Janie. She started with a composite of 90 at the beginning of the year. Then we have Alyssa. Alyssa started with a composite of 130. So Janie and Alyssa had very different composite scores. Janie is going to be compared with other children that begin with a composite of 90. And Alyssa, when we look at her growth, we're going to compare her growth with other children that began with a composite of 130. What we won't do is we won't compare Janie's growth to Alyssa's growth, since they're starting out in such different places. So that's just an explanation of how we compare growth. Okay, then what we do is we look at how everybody did at middle of year and end of year. And so while Janie's being compared with students that started at a 90, we know as the year progresses, different students will end up in different places. And that's where you'll get the different bands or the different pathways. So we can see some students that started at 90 fall into that well below typical progress, all the way up to some students at the end of the year fall into a well above typical progress. Once again, though, all these students started with a composite score of 90. Okay, so as we review progress towards goals, we want to do a few things. We want to be able to access the data and get into the data and see what it's saying to gauge our progress towards goals. We want to look at our current instruction and our current practices, and is that instruction and practice moving students towards their goals as we expected? And then, of course, we want to make adjustments. So if we're not on a path to reach our goals, we need to think what adjustments to our instruction and how we're working with the student, what adjustments can be made. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about proficiency. And we're at middle of year and looking at the class summary report from a proficiency view. As you'll see, this graphic right here has us on the MOY tab, and we can see from a proficiency standpoint where students are falling. Are they falling at that benchmark level, above benchmark, below, or well below? So we can see the first student falls into that benchmark level. We can also see where proficiency-wise how they're doing on the different measures. Okay, the question now is, how do I get to this Pathways of Progress growth data at the classroom level? So once again, I'm going to stay in that middle of year tab. Okay, make sure you're not just on your overall class summary tab. You want to be on the middle of the year tab. Okay, and then you want to go to Pathways of Progress. It has the 2 over it, and you want to turn that on. As soon as you do those 2 things, what you will find is an additional column will pop up on your classroom summary middle of year tab, and you can see it's pathway. Now, here's what the pathway is going to tell you. It has 2 pieces. If it has one of those upside down carrots on it, that means the goal was set by the teacher, and it tells you at what level the teacher set the goal at. So in this example on the right side of the screen, we can see that the teacher set a goal at above typical progress. Okay. The other part of reading this is how many are shaded in. Okay, so we can see that 3 of the boxes are shaded in, which is actually the pathway that was achieved by that student. So this student made typical progress at the MOY check-in. Okay, but 2 different things to realize. The upside down carrot is the goal set by the teacher. The filled in boxes tell you the actual pathway achieved.
So Andrew, on those boxes that are filled in, do they each stand for a specific category?
Yes, they do. So if we start at the far left, we have well below typical progress would be your far left. Below typical progress, above typical progress, and well above typical progress. So that hits our 5 bands of progress. Okay, if we just look at the first student, Bobby, we can see that at MOY, Bobby is at a well below benchmark composite score. And we can also see his pathway that the teacher set a goal of above typical progress, but Bobby is actually making well below typical progress. Okay, we can see that for a composite score as well as for the individual measures that Bobby had at MOY. So once again, we can look from a proficiency standpoint how he's doing, and we can also look from a growth standpoint on how Bobby is doing. Okay, the next thing we can do if we want to dig a little bit deeper is we can go to the progress monitoring charts, okay, or graphs. And what these will show us, right now we're looking at proficiency. So when we're talking proficiency, once again, we're talking about the benchmark category, well below benchmark, benchmark, and above benchmark. What we can see here is that this student was making progress through progress monitoring and ended up at the MOY at a benchmark level, okay, from a proficiency standpoint. If we want to look at this graph from a pathways of progress or growth standpoint, all we need to do is turn the pathways of progress to on, and then you can see it will show us the bands of the pathways of growth. And so what you'll see here is where we ended up right now is right at well above typical progress. So this student is making great progress. We also saw in proficiency that are benchmark levels. So once again, we're getting those two views. This orange line right here will show you the pathway goal that we set, okay? So we set an above typical goal, and our student is actually on a trajectory to make well above typical. So just another way to dig a little bit deeper into the data and also look at progress monitoring and what kind of path that progress monitoring is putting us on. Okay, so we've looked at the data. We understand from a proficiency standpoint as well as from a growth standpoint how the students in our classroom are doing. Now the question is, what do I do next? And so what we've done along with CDE is we put together a graphic of the discussion process. Now, obviously this graphic is pretty small and we'll break it down where we can see it better. And we're also going to make this available to you in a PDF format so that you can have a copy of it on your own. But here's a sample process that you could go through at your school to discuss and see where your students are and what are our next steps going to be. Obviously, you would be free to format and tailor this to meet your needs at this school, at your school, but this is a good starting point. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to review our classroom pathways of progress growth, and we're going to pick a student by doing what we just did at looking at those classroom reports. Is this student on track to meet his or her goal? So if I say no, I'm going to go ahead and look at some of those progress monitoring graphs and determine where instruction has been focused and if there's been progress on these skills. If I say yes, I'm going to celebrate and document successful instructional practices. One quick reminder when we look at this to see if they're on track to meet his or her goal. As we set goals, especially for students that are struggling or have some of the gaps in their early literacy skills, we want to be mindful that it really is important to set those goals at above or well above typical progress. We know that if a student has gaps, we need to be working to catch that student up as quickly and efficiently and effectively as we can. And so that's why it's recommended to choose that above or well above typical progress. Okay, so we found with the student that we picked, this student is on track to meet their goal. So we've documented those instructional practices. We know what's working. And then we're just going to do a check. Should there be any instructional adjustments for the second semester? Okay. If we feel like there should be, we could look into adjusting the instruction, either the time, the materials, the intensity, or the group size. Okay. As we continue to move down and have these discussions, another important piece of this is we need to plan how we're going to monitor the progress of the student. So if we make adjustments, how are we going to monitor to know if those adjustments are effective? Once we do that, then we're ready to deliver instruction and start that monitoring of the progress. Okay, other situation is our students not on track to meet their goal. So we start by looking at their progress monitoring graphs with the Pathways of Progress view enabled. And then we start to discuss, has this student been in intervention and had the necessary supports? Okay. So if this student has been in intervention, we want to review the elements of the intervention and we want to make adjustments. And we want to make adjustments because we know they are not on target to reach the goals that we have for the student. And so we want to make those adjustments so that we can start to get back on that pathway to reach those goals and to continue to make progress. Once again, we're going to look at things such as time, materials, intensity, group size. as we did with the other student who is making the right kind of progress, we're still going to plan how we're going to monitor the progress of this student. I can't highlight enough how important that is, that we know and we plan and we're all on the same page of how we monitor that progress. And then we're going to document and inform all stakeholders and everybody that's involved with helping this student be successful. Okay, so if the student has not been in intervention, then we need to decide, does the student need intervention or some type of scaffolded support? Okay, so if they need intervention, we'll create a specific intervention plan that includes time, materials, intensity, and group size. If they need scaffolded support, then we're identifying supports needed above and beyond our core instruction, such as small group instruction. So that's our first decision point there. Once again, we will plan how we will monitor the progress. We'll document and inform all stakeholders, and then we'll start to deliver instruction and monitor progress. Okay, so we just went through this process diagram as a sample of a way to go through your Pathways of Progress growth data and to take action on it. Once again, we will provide a copy of the flow chart. So, next steps. If you have not already, start to plan those data conversations around Pathways of Progress. Create that timeline to have the data discussions with teachers and try to have those discussions as soon as possible so that middle of your benchmark data is still fresh and is still relevant. Determine who all needs to be included in the conversations, and then with that team, review the classroom and the grade level growth. Have teachers bring specific data for the students that they are concerned about. So once again, we want to make this a team process so that we make sure we're doing everything we can to help these students be successful. Okay, Tammy, that takes us through the presentation.
It does. Do we have any questions? The recording of this webinar, the PowerPoint presentation, and the flowchart will all be emailed to you all directly as well as posted on our website. Please feel free to share this with any and everyone. Use it in your PLCs or other learnings with staff, but we have some time for questions and are happy to take those now if you have some. Oh, Andrew, could you show us again how to get to those progress monitoring charts?
You bet. Okay, so here's what the charts look like to actually get there. What you would do is if you clicked on any of this, if you clicked on, and I don't know if we have a visual here in this presentation, Tammy.
We don't actually.
Okay, I'll voice it over and hopefully this will help. If you clicked on a student's name, it will take you to an individual student report. And from there, you can click on the different measures. They'll have a little icon that looks like a graph, and that's how you'll get to those progress monitoring graphs. And Tammy, maybe what we can do as well is there's a help document that will tell you how to get there. Maybe we can send that.
That would be perfect,
okay.
Yes. And please feel free to, if you have questions around that and need a little bit more support, to give me a call and we can walk through that together too. I'm happy to help you find how to get to those graphs. Any other questions at this point? One thing to think about, if Pathways of Progress were not set at the beginning of year, you can still access this information for students. You just wouldn't have the teacher's targeted goal that was already set, but you would definitely be able to look at this information for any student who was here beginning of year and again middle of year. Ashley, I see you had a question. Would you mind typing that in the chat for us? can you print the Pathways of Progress page that shows the goals per student?
Just through a screenshot.
Yeah, there isn't like a specific report that pulls that information, but if you did like control and print screen or did a screenshot that way, you could print that page per student with those goals set. Absolutely. You're welcome, Ashley. And if you have more questions about that, please reach out to me and I can help you with that too. Okay, looks like we don't have any other questions, right? Oh, Julie. And we've got a couple more that came in. Do we need to be progress monitoring students on grade level for it to show up on their pathways graph? Yes, you do. The pathways are set based on grade level expectations. Do keep in mind, though, that the pathways set according to other students who achieved that same score beginning of year and were very similar to that student. So those pathways goals within the system that you could set are calibrated that way so that you could still see the expected kinds of growth based on the pathways that are in that goal setting tool. And Julie, would you mind typing your question in the chat, or, oh, how long? So the webinar recording will be up probably by noon tomorrow. That's my plan. It takes a little while for it to get processed and sent to me, but and it will be available from then on out. So once I send you that link, you can access it at any time. And absolutely, I'm so glad that you would like to use this with your teachers. It's going to be really helpful, I think. And let us know how it goes. It's a really cool tool, and we're excited that people are using Pathways of Progress this year. Okay, well, expect an email from me by noon tomorrow with the attachments, with the PowerPoint, with the link to the recording, with that flow chart. And if any other questions come up, please let us all know. And thank you so much again for your time today. Have a great afternoon and a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everybody.